Hey, good night, everyone. This week is Parshas Nitzavim, where the Torah discusses the concept of Arvos, which is basically that Kol Yisrael Arevim Zeh Lo Zeh, that we as a nation, as a Yiddish nation, we have responsibility on one another. That's the idea of the first psukim in this week's Parsha. A person shouldn't say that I'm Baruch, he'll basically do whatever he wants, as the Torah know. Atem Nitzavim Ayoim Kulchem. Today, this idea of Kulchem, that we're together in unity as one nation, this gives us the koyach to be able to flourish and to continue. And this is what Moshe Rabbeinu told Klal Yisrael, Atem Nitzavim Ayoim. The reason why we're still standing, we're still here, Hayoim today, which in the Shevarim Akdoshim it says Hayoim doesn't mean only the day that Moshe Rabbeinu spoke. Hayoim is the day, all the days at Sof Kal Adoros until Mashiach's day. How is it that we as a nation, we're still around, we still exist? It's all because Kulchem, as Moshe Rabbeinu says, we're all together, Roshechem, Shiftechem, Ziknechem, Shoitrechem, Kol Yish Yisrael, every Yid, there's a unity, there's a bond together from one Yid to another, and this is the koyach, this gives us koyach to be able to continue and to be the nation that we are. The Chassam Sofer in the drasha says a very interesting thought. He says there's a halacha in Shulchan Aruch that a person should see a person who is a Baal tefillah, person who davens for the Amit on Rosh Hashanah, a person who is a Baal Tekiah who is blowing shofar on Rosh Hashanah, says the Shulchan Aruch that those people should see to the last 3 days before Rosh Hashanah to put in more kedusha, more achana, more preparation, so that when they enter Rosh Hashanah, they should be in a good state of mind, in a good place, in a place of kedusha, in a place of taharas hamachshava. Their thoughts should be pure. So there's a concept that about tefillah and about tekiah 3 days before Rosh Hashanah, to make the right preparation, the hachana, to prepare themselves appropriately, that they should be able to daven, to be the Baal Tefillah and to be the Baal Tekiah. Says the Chassam Sofer, the Beis Yosef wrote this over 500 years ago. He says in those days, the Baal Tefillah and the Baal Tekiah, they were able to accomplish by themselves, meaning on their own, to be able to uplift the entire community, all the mispalim, all the congregants, to a place where the people were in a good state of mind to be able to daven properly. Says the Chassam Sofer, and this is the Chassam Sofer talking over 200 years ago. He says, in our days, it's not enough that only the Baal Tekiah, only the person who blows shofar, only the Baal Tefillah, that those people, the people who are basically leading the Kehillah, they should prepare themselves 3 days before Rosh Hashanah, says the Chassam Sofer. In our days, and this is already 200 years ago, every single person should put in the effort on their own with preparation 3 days before Rosh Hashanah, because today we need every single person, because we're on a lower madrega, we're on a lower level, we need everyone to put in the effort, because we don't have that koyach that we had many, many years ago of one person doing it for everyone. We have to put it in, we have to put in the preparation on our own. So this Shabbos Kodesh, Parshas Nitzavim, is exactly 3 days before Rosh Hashanah. According to this Chassam Sofer, this Shabbos is a very unique, very special, with the preparation for Shabbos, Sunday, Monday, the 3 last days before Rosh Hashanah, to put in a little bit more thought, concentration, to prepare ourselves in the right state of mind. On the pasuk Atem Nitzavim Ayoim Kulchem, says the Be'er Ma'im Chaim, the Chernivtzer Rebbe, he says, we know the famous Zoyar which says, Kol berachon de le'ele v'sato, all the brachos from above and from over here, beneath, over here in our world, miyoyma shviyah talyon, everything is dependent on the 7th day, which is Shabbos Kodesh. Says the Be'er Ma'im Chaim, this week, the Be'er Ma'im Chaim wants to understand. We know that the Chazal teach us, the Chachamim teach us in Masechtes Rosh Hashanah. Why is it that we read Parshas Kisava, which is last week's Parsha? Why is it that we read it right before Rosh Hashanah? Says the Gemara that if Chas v'Shalom, there's some klala, some Chas v'Shalom curse klala that a person has to suffer, go through, the reading of the klalas, the reading of the toichacha, of the rebuke in the Torah, should be the klala that the person should go through, Chas v'Shalom. And we're hoping with the reading itself will accomplish what we needed, and it should be Tichla Shana v'Kilol. The year should end with its Chas v'Shalom curses, and V'Tochel Shana, the next year, should begin in Berchasel with bracha. So this is what the Gemara says. So in other words, we read Parshas Kisava, which is last week, in order to finish the year. If we needed Chas v'Shalom to go through some klala, this should be the end, and everything should from now on go upwards. It should only be bracha. So says the Be'er Ma'im Chaim, the Chernivtzer Rebbe, if this is the reason why we read the Teichacha before Rosh Hashanah to end the year, he says that, but there is another week. There's another Shabbos Kodesh, Parshas Nitzavim. So it's not exactly before. It's not mamish right before right before Rosh Hashanah. There's still 1 week, which is this week's Parsha, Parshas Nitzavim, which is after Kisavoi, not Rosh Hashanah yet, and we're still not. Basically, we're reading a parsha in between. Why? So says the Be'er Ma'im Chaim, he says beautifully. He says like this. He says this Shabbos is already the beginning of Rosh Hashanah, because all the brachos which is going to come in the week all begin on Shabbos Kodesh. So if everything is dependent in Shabbos Kodesh, because all the bracha comes on Shabbos, so according to this, says the Be'er Ma'im Chaim, so this Shabbos is already a beginning to this big Yom Tov Rosh Hashanah. If this is, he says the Shabbos is such an important Shabbos to put in the right koyach, the right energy into davening, into singing zmiros, into saying divrei Torah, into talking only good things, good diburim, good words, because this is the Shabbos, which the week which Rosh Hashanah will be in, is basically brings already it. All the Shefa comes already into the universe, starting from the Shabbos Kodesh. So according to this, says the Be'er Ma'im Chaim, last week, which was Parshas Kisavoi, yes, this is the last Shabbos before Rosh Hashanah, which is Parshas Nitzavim, which is already a beginning, Haschala, for this Heilige Yom Tov, for this Heilige Yom Adin, Rosh Hashanah. So basically, this is a powerful way, the way he sees this week's Shabbos, which this week's Shabbos, according to the Be'er Ma'im Chaim, there's a lot going on in terms of all the bracha and everything that will take place during the week. So he says, Atem Nitzavim, he says, Hayoim, in the Zohar HaKadosh, Hayoim, says the Zohar, Do Rosh Hashanah. Hayoim, the day, says the Zohar HaKadosh, is referring to Rosh Hashanah. So he says, Atem Nitzavim Hayoim. So the way he teaches this, Hayoim, he says, on Shabbos Kodesh, when we read the Parsha of Nitzavim, it's already a haschala beginning to the Hayoim, to the Rosh Hashanah, because all the bracha for the week, which Rosh Hashanah is included in the week, starts, everything begins on Shabbos Kodesh. Now, just to add to this amazing idea of the Be'er Mayim Chaim, that this Shabbos is a very important Shabbos. The Heilige Tanya, the Baal Tanya writes, brings in the name of his big Rebbe, the Maggid of Mezrich. And the Maggid of Mezrich, he said it in the name of the Baal Shem Tov. Says the Baal Tanya, this week should have been a Mevorchim HaChodesh. We should have had Birchas HaChodesh. Just like every month we do Birchas HaChodesh, we should have done the Birchas HaChodesh on Tishrei as well. Now we know, Chazal teach us, we don't do it Bekesa because it's a hidden month. But says the Baal Tanya in the name of his Rebbe, the Geroise Maggid, the Maggid of Mezrich, who says it in the name of Baal Shem Tov, something so powerful. He says, this month, Kavyochel Hashem benches the Chodesh. We don't. We humans, we don't do it. But Kavyochel the Rebbeinu Shel Olam, he is the one giving Birchas HaChodesh for the month of Tishrei. And he says in the name of the Baal Shem Tov, that through this Shabbos, through the Birchas HaChodesh, this Shabbos from Kavyochel the Rebbeinu Shel Olam, all the months from the entire year are benched. So we see this amazing thought, the way the Baal Tanya sees this Shabbos. So before we saw the Be'er Mayim Chaim sees the Shabbos as a beginning to the big Rosh Hashanah, because all the brachas come in Shabbos. But now we see the Baal Tanya says that all the bracha for all the months, which is the Birchas HaChodesh from the entire year, all start with this Shabbos, which is the Birchas HaChodesh that Hashem gives the bracha for this Chodesh. So we see again and again that this Shabbos is a very important Shabbos and a very powerful Shabbos. The Levush, which is one of the Poskim, he writes, why is it that we read Parshas Nitzavim right before Rosh Hashanah? So before I shared with you from the Be'er Mayim Chaim the way he teaches his Atem Nitzavim Hayoim, that this is the Hayoim is Rosh Hashanah, so it hints Rosh Hashanah. But the Levush says something very, very powerful. He says like this: towards the end of the Parsha, this week, we have the Parsha of Teshuva. The Torah basically talks about Klal Yisrael returning, doing Teshuva and returning to the Rebbeinu Shel Olam. So says the Levush, because we are now entering Aseres Yimei Teshuva, the 10 days of Teshuva, which obviously is a time that we need to focus and put in more effort in Teshuva. Therefore, the Torah that we read right before Rosh Hashanah has in it the Parsha of Teshuva, because this is the appropriate time for Teshuva. Now, to take a few of the psukim, which has to do with Teshuva, and just to talk about, elaborate a little bit about it, to take chizuk, to take strength, what Teshuva is, how we do Teshuva, and so on. So Moshe Rabbeinu says, this is actually a pasuk still before, a few psukim before the Parsha of Teshuva, Perek Chavtes, pasuk Yud Ches. Moshe Rabbeinu says like this, reading it from inside the Chumash. He says, "V'hoya, it will be b'shamai when he will hear as divrei ha'ola azois. He would hear this curse, which means Moshe Rabbeinu is talking very strong words to Klal Yisrael. What will happen if we don't behave? V'isborach b'levavoi, and he will bench himself, he'll bless himself in his heart. Leimoi, shalom ye'ali, it would be good in my heart. Kibishriris libi elech. I'll go according to what my heart tells me to." In other words, he'll basically dismiss everything that Moshe Rabbeinu said. Too much pressure, so to say, and I'll say, I'll just do whatever my heart desires. There is a Targum Yonason and his Uziel, which is obviously one of the Tanoim, says, you know what Shriris Libi Eilech means? You know what it means? I will go in the whatever my heart desires. He adds two words. V'yisyayesh b'liboy. Targum Yonason adds these two words. He will give up in his heart and say, it's not for me. He adds the word yush. When a person gives up, that's when a person chas v'sholem that's when he makes the wrong decisions. When a person falls into that mindset, it's not for me, I don't have the koyach, I don't have the strength. Being an elachiyid, being a yid, serving Hashem is so difficult, it's not for me. The yush, this is when the first person falls into the trap of chas v'sholem, not fulfilling whatever a person needs to fulfill. So this is number one, an important concept to keep in mind, that we see according to the Targum Yonason. When is it that a person gives up? When is it that a person dismisses everything? When a person gives up. And obviously, that's when a person loses this opportunity, which is tshuva, which is to returning to the Rebbeinu Shalom, because that's when the person's mind goes off track, thinking, it's not for me. It's not for me, this whole thing. I did so much chas v'sholom averis. I can't. It's not for me. But let's move a little bit into the actual parsha of tshuva itself. Moshe Rabbeinu in the parsha of Perek Lamed, Pasuk Daled, when he talks about tshuva, he says like this: Im yeh nidechacha, if you'll be thrown away b'ktzei hashamayim, on the other end of the heavens, the sky, misham yikabetzcha Hashem alikecha, from there Hashem will gather you, misham yikachecha, from there He'll bring you. So the Talmidei Baal Shem Tov, the way they teach this, so many times we feel thrown away. We don't feel connected to davening. We don't feel connected to doing mitzvahs. We don't feel connected to Yiddishkeit. We feel thrown away. We feel chas v'sholem that the Rebbeinu Shalom is not close to us, and we're not close to him, obviously. We feel that farness. Say the Talmidei Baal Shem. Moshe Rabbeinu says right in the beginning, right Pasuk Dal in the beginning of the Parsha of Tshuva, even if you will feel, this is the feeling, say the Talmidei Baal Shem Tov, even if you will feel nidechacha miktzei hashamayim, you'll feel thrown away, you'll feel that you're not close to anything, any ruchnius, any spirituality. Keep in mind, Hashem is right there, wherever you are, that's where Hashem is. Therefore, the Baal Shem Tov says, which is in Parshas Kisova, not in this Parsha, it says, Ubikashta misham es Hashem Elokecha. Ubikashta misham, says the Baal Shem Tov, and you shall search and you shall seek Hashem misham, from there. What is this misham? Says the Baal Shem Tov. Misham, wherever you are, doesn't matter where you are, as far as you feel, chas v'sholem, far from Hashem, far from feeling connection, Hashem is right there. Ubikashta misham, right where you are, that's where Hashem is, and that's where you could beg Hashem, and you could reconnect to Hashem. And therefore Moshe Rabbeinu, when he ends the parsha of Tshuva, he says, you should know, this mitzvah of Tshuva is not rechoika, it's not far. Ki korov elecha hadava ma'oid. It's very close to you, and this is what he says in Pasuk Yudalid. It's so close to the person. You just have to open your mouth. You just have to put your heart to it, and right there, a person has the koyach, the strength to come back to the Rebbeinu Shalom to Hashem. So it's all basically, just to explain it a little bit more in depth, the Degel Machne Ephraim, the grandson of the Baal Shem Tov, he brings the mashal, a parable, and it's a famous parable, but it's worthwhile to chazer, and I mentioned it already in the previous Shiurim, that there was once a king which wanted to see which of his servants are really very loyal to him. So what did he do? Around his palace, he built a lot of mountains and a lot of valleys, and very close to his palace, he threw all this all these pebbles and rocks, and he made it very difficult for a person to be able to reach his palace. Says the Degel Machne Ephraim, the king did it for one purpose, because he wanted to see who is really very loyal to him. So he said what happened was, when a person started putting in the effort and he started walking towards the king, as he was coming closer and closer and he saw these big mountains and these valleys, if he didn't stop and he started walking up the mountain, suddenly he sees the mountain disappears. Same with the valleys. He went into the valley, he started putting in the effort, suddenly it disappears. All these rocks and stones and pebbles surrounding the palace, once he starts walking and he doesn't give up, everything disappears. Says the Degel Machne Ephraim, this is a mashal that my Zaydi, the Baal Shem Tov, gave, and he said this is the way the Yetzer Hara operates. The Yetzer Hara puts different obstacles in front of us, and he pretends and he wants us to think that all this is beyond our capability to be able to overcome. Once we put in the effort, we see things disappear. It's way easier, way simpler, that the way the Yetzer Hara paints the picture, so to say, and puts it in front of us, and he fantasizes things, and this is the way that we get Chas v'Shalom removed from Hashem. But actually, he says, Moshe Rabbeinu, it's koroi ve'elecha. It's so close. If we put in a little bit effort, a little sarusa de l'sat, a little effort, suddenly everything disappears. And this idea, this concept, that the Yetzer Hara comes all the time to us, we see that on Rosh Hashanah, one of the things that we read is the Parsha of the Akedah. One of the days in Rosh Hashanah, we read the Parsha of the Akedah. Why? Because we know that Avraham Avinu, before going to the Akedah, there were so many obstacles that were put in front of him. The Yetzer Hara, the Satan, came with all different ways to get Avraham Avinu sidetracked, that he should give up. And Avraham Avinu didn't give up. And what happened? Till today, we're still benefiting from this overcoming, from the challenges that Avraham Avinu had when he was on the way to the Akedah, and he overcame these challenges. We're still benefiting till today. And this is what Moshe Rabbeinu was saying. Ki koroi v'elecha, it's so close to you. The Yetzer Hara gets us, and he wants that we should think that it's very difficult, that it's impossible. Now, one more idea on this parsha of Teshuva before moving forward to speak about Rosh Hashanah itself. It's an amazing thing which we find all the time, the same idea over and over, which I just mentioned, which is the fantasy that we can't do it. And be'etzem, we know that the Torah teaches us that Teshuva is not, there's a famous Chassidish word. Teshuva is not a beer, it's not a big dove, it's not a big bear. Teshuva is just a care. In Yiddish, it works very well because it's a rhyme. Teshuva is nishkan bear, Teshuva is not a care. Which means with one real charata, with one real Teshuva, everything falls to the side. And this is basically what Moshe Rabbeinu says. Rosh Hashanah, the Gemara says in Masechtas Rosh Hashanah, on Rosh Hashanah, 3 very important tzidkaniyos were remembered by Hashem to have children. Famous Sarah, Rochel, and Chana. These 3 noshim tzidkaniyos were zoicha to have children. They were zoicha to be remembered in Shemayim on Rosh Hashanah to have children. Says the Mashar explains on this Gemara, the way he teaches, it's just very practical. He says like this. He says, All three of them, Sarah, Rachel, and Chana, naturally they couldn't have children. Rosh Hashanah is a time that we could change the nature. We could change the teva. We could change the mazel. Whatever we had, a mazel, chas v'sholem, not to have parnasa, on Rosh Hashanah, we could change it. And Rosh Hashanah could be the changing point that there should be shefa, leroy for the entire year. Not only with parnasa, with children as well. If chas v'sholem in Shemayim there was a gzeira for a person not to have a child, when it comes to Rosh Hashanah, everything can be turned around. And this is when the Gemara says, Sarah, Rachel, and Chana, all three of them, there was zoicha that in Rosh Hashanah, their whole status, the whole being changed. From not being able to have children on Rosh Hashanah, this is when the Rabbi Shalom Hashem changed it. And that's why, says the Marsha, this is a day which is called Yom HaZikaron. It's a day of remembering, meaning that Hashem, when he remembers everything, he could switch it either way for good or chas v'sholom, the opposite. And when we put in the right koyach into our davening and into Rosh Hashanah the way it should be, we could make that the Rebbeinu Shalom should turn it from chas v'sholom, from not good to good. Not only, says the Gemara, these three tzidkanios were zoicha to have children in Rosh Hashanah, that their whole being changed. Yosef HaTzadik, zok the Gemara, also was released from prison on Rosh Hashanah. So Yosef HaTzadik, his life turned 180 degrees on Rosh Hashanah. He was zoicha to go from the lowest to the highest place. Also, says the Gemara, the shibud, the hard work in Mitzrayim, stopped Rosh Hashanah. So what do we see from all this, says the Marsha? Rosh Hashanah is a time that everything turns around. Now, if we have the seichel, we turn it around in a very positive way by the preparation that we make and by the way that we put in the koyach and davening in Rosh Hashanah. The Shloah HaKadosh, when he explains what a Tekiah, what a Shevarim, what a Teruah, what a Tekiah is, he explains it the way he says it like this. He says, Tekiah tells us, shows us when things are yashar, things are straight, which is the way he sees it is spirit in a ruchniistic aspect. When we're doing what we need to do, when we behave the way we should behave, when everything goes in as a yid the way it should go. He says Shevarim shows when things start becoming broken up. When chas v'sholem, we don't behave in a yashar, straight way, things start becoming a little broken. Says the Shloah HaKadosh, what should a person do after that, chas v'sholem, when there is a break? He says Teruah. Teruah, these very short sounds, which is he says this is showing the cry, the bechia, the cry that a person cries and he has charota and he goes back on what he did. He basically does tshuva. He says the teruah is showing the idea of tshuva. So again, Shevarim, when you went and you did what you needed to do. The Teruah, Tekiah. Tekiah is when you did what you needed to do, yashar. Shevarim, when chas v'sholem things became a little broken up. Teruah, he says, is already when you start becoming a little bit emotional, meaning you start doing tshuva and going back on what you did and you cry and you regret what you did. He says then comes back again a Tekiah. Once a person regrets, he does tshuva, which goes back what we spoke before, then things are back to the way it was. And you no need to be nervous. Oh, what's going to be with the days that I chas v'sholom didn't behave? If you do tshuva and you have charata, things straighten out. So he says a very interesting thing. He says that's why there is always a Tekiah Gedola. He says why? Because when a person does Teshuva, not only that everything that he did, he corrects, but he becomes even closer to Hashem. Tekiah Gedola, he says it's even a stretch, meaning he's even closer than he was before. It brings him even closer to Hashem through Teshuva, because Gedola Teshuva Shemekareves, and Yosef, we know b'makom shabal Teshuva oimdim. We know that it's way bigger than tzadikim gemurim yicholim lamed. Another few ideas before finishing this year, which is also again the same. Everything goes back to this same idea of Rosh Hashanah as a time which we have to put in the focus and the energy, because this is basically setting the tone of the year. Rabbi Bayer, who was one of the Talmidim of the Baal Shem Tov, he writes in his Sefer, Imre Pinchas, he made a Sefer, he writes in his Sefer, he says like this, he says, you shouldn't eat anything sour on Rosh Hashanah. Now, people don't know this. The idea is not to eat something sour. Why? Because the natural instinct of a person, when a person eats something sour, he makes a sour face. On Rosh Hashanah, you shouldn't make a sour face. Why? He explains it. He says like this. He says, just like when a person builds a big structure, before that, he has a blueprint in order to be able to know how to build this structure. He says Rosh Hashanah is the blueprint for the year. The way we behave, we're basically setting the print for the entire year. So therefore, which is incredible, if we have a bitter face, it chas v'sholem could set the tone for the year for bitterness. So according to Rabbi Pinchas Karetz, it's not the eating the bitter, the sour thing. It's the sour face that we make, which is basically putting the blueprint for the entire year in a bitter note, on a sour note. So we see this amazing, beyond amazing idea that Rosh Hashanah, basically, the way our movements are, it has an effect for the entire year. Now, the Brisker of Revelvel Brisker, we know that he was a huge masmid, but when it came Rosh Hashanah, he would focus on Tehillim. He would say Tehillim over and over and over. When he was asked why, he used to say, because when I learned, said the Briskerov, I always have kashis. Things bother me in the Gemara. And naturally, I get up to get a sefer, to look it up. Maybe I'll find a pshat, a different mesechta, a different one of the Rishonim to find in the Shevarim. It's a pity, and this is way, way beyond, obviously. It's a pity for these few moments that I get up and I go take a sefer. It's a pity. It's a pity to waste these few moments. Therefore, I rather say Tehillim, which Tehillim just flows. The Briskerov also once, there was one of the Talmidim from the Briskerov once came to the Briskerov Rosh Hashanah in the afternoon, and he saw that the Briskerov, with all of his sons, with his Rebbetzin, and with his daughter-in-laws, was sitting by the table, and they were saying Tehillim in such an intense way. They were saying it's so intense, mamish. It looked like something was mamish, something was happening really serious. So at some point, the Talmud asked, Rebbe, can I ask you a question? And the Briskerov said, yeah. He says, Rebbe, tell me, what is happening? Why is it that everyone is saying Tehillim with such an intensity? He says, don't you know why? You didn't hear? My wife needs the Tehillim. What, your wife doesn't feel well? Didn't you hear that my son needs the Tehillim? He said, why? What's it? He said, you're not chapping. Now we're setting the tone for the entire year. When we say the Tehillim intensely on Rosh Hashanah, we're avoiding so many different chas v'sholem things that could happen throughout the year by putting in the effort in Rosh Hashanah. So yes, I'm putting in the effort, said the Briskerov. So this should be, the year should be a year of Grois Hatzlacha. Now another 2 points, 2 thoughts before ending this year. The Pnei Menachem, which was the Gerer Rebbe, to the last Gerer Rebbe, there was once a person who came to him, a younger man who came to him after many years that he didn't have children. And he came to him before Rosh Hashanah and he cried. He said, Rebbe, please, what can I do to have children? He said an interesting thing. He said, I have the Kabbalah, I have passed down from one generation, that in the Nisana Toikef, when we say Nisana Toikef in the Musaf from Rosh Hashanah, obviously Yom Kippur also, and we say over there, Kama Ya Avrun, which means, simple meaning is, Chas v'shalom, how many people will pass away this year? But he said, Kama Ya Avrun, he says, refers to pregnancies. How many women will be zoiche to expect a child and to have a child? He says, I have the Kabbalah, that when you put in Kavana in these 2 words, Kama Ya Avrun, people are zoiche to have children. So just another interesting thing. Again, we see the koyach of Rosh Hashanah, which is, again, the same idea, putting in the koyach in Rosh Hashanah. One more thought before we finish this year. We all know the minig that we dip the apple in honey. We dip the challah in honey. There's a lot of honey going on Rosh Hashanah, Aseret Yemei Teshuva, and after that, Sukkot. What is the idea behind the honey? So this is also Reb Pinchas Karetz, and it's a famous word, but it's also a powerful word. It again comes to teach us the same idea that I shared before, that Rosh Hashanah is a time that we could change everything. He says, if you take the Devorah, which is the bee, it's a tamina. It's tamei. It's a tamina sheretz. It's tamei. You chas v'sholem, you can't eat it. But in the same time, the dvash, which is produced through the bee, not only that you could eat it, but it's a geschmacka food. So he says, we see from here how things, from the same thing that Hashem created, there are 2 opposites. The bee itself, everyone runs away from because it stings, it bites you, or whatever. But when something that comes out from it is masuk midvash, which is honey itself. He says the same is with everything. He says a person shouldn't say, I was stinging throughout the year. I made so many mistakes. He says, no. We take this apple and we dip it in honey, showing that there's no things, there's no rule, that this is the way it is. Look at the honey. It comes from this bee, and it's zis, and it's geschmack. We should all be zoiche to a gewaldige Shabbos Kodesh. We should be zoiche to be able to make amazing use out of Rosh Hashanah. We should be zoiche that everything should only be good. We should have shefa. We should have parnasa berevach. We should have gesunte kinderlach. We should be able to marry off our kinderlach, and we should be zoiche to gesund parnasa and achas and to ksiva v'chsima toivet hagut gebench diyar bebias Mashiach tzedkenu b'mheira b'yameinu.